Thanks for tuning in to Season 4 of Strange, Rare, and Peculiar Homeopathy Podcast, where homeopathy lives, breathes, and evolves with Denise Strages and Alastair Gray. We'll be exploring modern practice, research, and philosophy, from Hahnemann's radical insights to today's breakthroughs and discoveries. Get ready for homeopathy woes, feedback from pros, and the more you knows.
Hi, everybody. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. My name is Alastair Gray. I am the Academic Director at the Academy of Homeopathy Education and the Research Director at the Institute for the Advancement of Homeopathy. And welcome.
Welcome. I'm Denise Strages, and I am the President and Clinical Director of same two organizations, the Academy of Homeopathy Education and the IAH, the Institute for the Advancement of Homeopathy. Welcome to the Strange, Rare, and Peculiar podcast, where today we will be talking about homeopathic remedies and provings and clinical information. And at the end, we'll get to some listener comments. We have, as usual, we got a doozy or two, and then we've got some amazing questions. And if people are interested in sending questions to us for a future episode, email marketing@ahe.online. That's marketing@ahe.online. And that'll get you to Sherry, who she's the brains behind the operation. First, we have a couple of announcements. What?
Thought that was you.
The brains behind the operation? Yeah. We're talking about you and I.
Well, because it really should be brains@ahe.online. That should be your email address. For me, I should be the muscle.
I love it. I love it. People, it was warm earlier this week, and Alastair was wearing his kilt to do some gardening. I got him a utility kilt for Christmas last year.
Best present ever.
Yeah, you were looking pretty burly.
Pretty fly, huh?
Pretty fly. You had your Carhartt vest on, you had your tool belt, you had there was so much equipment. It was
all the things.
All the things. It was a lot. Yeah, that was really great. Anyway.
Today, however, it's dropped centigrade. It must have dropped. It's probably 20 degrees. Yeah, it's dropped to at least 20 degrees. So I'm going to fess up. I'm having a beautiful hot cup of tea and I'm in front of the fire and it's nice.
Yeah, it is. I'm actually out in my office where I could not be when it was 400 degrees. I could have roasted chicken in here earlier in the week because in our new offices, the air conditioning unit has not been installed yet. So anyway, but we've got a couple of announcements and our practitioner testimonial of the week. I love that Sherry's got us in a format now. For those of you who didn't like the randomness of our podcast, you can thank Sherry for that. For those of you who
didn't like it, they wouldn't be here anymore.
The meandering randomness, it's not that different than how we spend the rest of our days just talking about homeopathy to each other. But anyway, first announcement is a huge congratulations to AHE's class of 2026. So lovely. We have our graduation coming up in a week and we've got all these really fun events planned and bravo. We've got some amazing people graduating. I'm so excited because we're really committed to raising up the next generation of leadership in homeopathy. One of the things I love about being a non-for-profit is that it's like the spirit is all about giving and it's not about trying to capitalize on it. I know there's a lot of sort of monetizing of homeopathy these days. And I don't know, it feels really nice to sit on the cleaner side of that sometimes.
The commodification of homeopathy.
Yeah. Anyway, we need it to be a great and thriving business. So I'm not arguing with that. If you've been thinking about becoming a homeopath with us, we enroll 2 cohorts every year. We are a boutique school. Our biggest class is under 40. Most of our classes hover around 20 people. Really intimate experience. We are the core teachers. We've got some adjunct faculty who are amazing, but most of the teaching and most of the clinic you and I do, gosh, there are only 3 of us that teach clinic. So there's a lot of experience with us. So we'd love for you to join us. Our next prospective student event is on June 17th at 7:00 Eastern time. Alastair, you have your final session of History of Healing.
Oh, we're up to session 4, which means that we are done with the Greeks and we're done with the Dark and the Middle Ages. And we are now about to start talking about the Renaissance. And the revival of all that amazing information that was lost during those 1500 years. And then we arrive in 1755. So my job is to talk to you from about 1492 to 1755, and I'm going to do that on Thursday, the 28th at 7 p.m.
Yes. And then when that's finished, then my free course starts, and that's Homeopathy and Integrative Wellness. And that starts June 16th at 7 p.m. And that's a free 4-part series where we talk about homeopathy and its role in integrative medicine. And so it's 4 parts. The first one is about food and nutrition. The second one is about body work and movement. The third one is about meditation and reflective practice. And then the fourth one is around homeopathy as a part of the contemporary medical marketplace and looking at sort of our role in the integrative medical conversation. So you can register for any events at ahe.online/events. That's ahe.online/events.
For those of you that are really wondering, Denise is sitting, she's an ex-dancer, and she sits very straight on her chair, which means there's a little gap for an extremely fat cat to sit behind her. So if you're wondering what happened to the cat that jumped on the back of the chair, there's the space behind, and that's where Hildegard of Bingen loves to hang out.
She is. She's trying to get on my lap, and I'm trying to keep her next to me. Anyway, we've got just one more thing, which is Comfort Care Practitioner course. So a couple of years ago, we were inspired to start this program, Homeopathy, Comfort Care, and it's a palliative and end-of-life care, basically homeopathy hospice. And we have the course, and I'll be teaching that again in July. It's enrolling now, available to all practitioners, or if you're a student, we just ask that you have the basics under your belt before enrolling, and you can go to ahe.online for details. I love this course. We've really built it out beautifully. 3 of us actually studied to be death doulas 2 summers ago, so that in the development of this course, we could really understand all of the components of not just the how people die part, but the landscape of the kind of the business of it between hospice and death doulas, and the interface with the medical system and de-escalation of care and all of that. And it was an amazing program to put together. We've trained, I think, about 75, 80 people at this point. And we have a whole infrastructure for telehealth service in homeopathy, hospice, palliative, and end-of-life care. So anybody who's interested, we would love to have you. And we changed the time to make it doable for folks who are in the UK and in Europe. So anyway, if you like this podcast, follow us wherever you listen, and then you'll get notified whenever a new episode drops. We try to record every Friday to drop on Monday or Tuesday of the following week, but it's really helping us to get more reach. So thanks for everybody who's supporting that. All right. So
ring the bell, ring the water.
We need a bell. There's a Tibetan singing bowl behind you.
I got a bunch of bells in here, actually.
Oh, bells. At our graduation every year, we've been doing this from the first year. How many classes have we graduated by now? I know I ask you this all the time.
We're teaching our 33rd. I think
Okay.
we're rolling our 33rd.
So we've probably graduated, I don't know, 28 maybe, have finished already. And we're that's right. We're enrolling 33 and 34.
It depends on if you think of it in terms of graduation year or graduation class, because sometimes we had 3 classes in one year.
It's too complicated. Anyway, we've been doing this a lot. Yeah. All right. Before we hit on to our
topic, ringing the bell. You were telling the story about ringing the bell.
Oh, sorry. That's right. So at graduation every year,
ding dong.
This is from the first graduating class. I don't know where it came from. I think the idea was around being a homeopath. You're essentially working, for many people, you're working alone, and you're working on your cases alone. And there are people who used to always say it was a lonely profession, and we were so committed to changing that. I was really lucky. I worked in a group practice very early in my career, and I always loved working in that environment. So we decided that we were going to create both a realistic community where everybody was going to work together, but also have a signal, like a mnemonic in a way. So whenever somebody is feeling like they need help, you just ring your bell, and you know that if you ring that bell, there's someone who will hear it. And so we have a little bell ringing ceremony at our graduation every year, and everybody gets a bell, and all the faculty and supervisors get a bell at graduation as well. It's It's a lovely little ritual. Anyway, all right, practitioner testimonial of the week, and then we're going to hit our main topic. Someone wrote in and said, we had such a great experience with Homeopathy Help Now. Cindy, a student homeopath, truly went above and beyond to support my son during an acute situation. After just the first appointment, we saw about a 90% improvement in his cold, cough, low energy, and lack of appetite. She followed up with us every day and made us feel genuinely cared for. Her dedication and attentiveness were incredible. We felt so supported throughout the whole process. We highly recommend HHN for anyone navigating an acute issue. The care and attention we received were exceptional. Yay. That's great. That's homeopathyhelpnow.com. And you can navigate in to get an acute appointment, chronic, complex care, and then, of course, the palliative and end-of-life care. And remember, we are a not-for-profit. This is not a for-profit initiative. This is part of education and research. And anytime that someone is being seen by a student practitioner, that student is very heavily supervised. So you're basically getting double the care at a really reasonable price. All right. So that's it. Let's hit our topic. We're going to talk about provings. I got there because when we were planning for today, we were talking about what we taught in the past week. And you taught the remedy plutonium nitricum, and you were a prover. And so then we thought, oh, let's talk a little bit about provings, which then took us to provings. And then from the idea of provings through to a class that I taught last week, which is critical thinking in contemporary systems and methodologies and remedies in homeopathy.
Yeah. It is what defines us. But in your threefold definition of homeopathy, there's no mention of the term proving. But of course, it's really critical, because how can you know what a substance does unless you've done a trial or a test on it, right? And
Yeah,
so,
wait, I'm grabbing my threefold. I think it's in there. We can add that in, but yeah, the proving, the clinical trial is, because otherwise, like, how do you know what it does?
but if you're thinking about what defines homeopathy, what is homeopathy, somewhere in that definition, from my point of view, I think it's good to talk about the way in which we gather information from which we make our clinical decisions. You right there, Tiger?
Yeah, I'm getting that. Oh no, it's not in here. Oh, here it is.
So when you think about it, a proving or a trial on a healthy person of a substance in order to determine what profile that remedy then has, what medical profile that remedy then has, is a critical part of what we do. And Hahnemann is I think probably in a way, he is the first to write about the importance of it. Did you find any historical precedents for the proving in any of the research you've done?
No, in fact, that is the thing that makes it so interesting about Hahnemann and his discoveries. And by the way, I found my 3-pronged analysis, and yeah, proving is number 2. I was like,
no, you misunderstood what I meant. I wasn't talking about your 3-pronged analysis. I was talking about your description of what homeopathy is.
Oh, that's my 4th, one remedy at a time for the largest totality of symptoms. Oh, no, you always correct me, and you're right. The most meaningful totality of symptoms that can be perceived, prescribed according to the law of similars and given in the minimum dose to begin that healing action. But yeah, there isn't a conversation about the remedy itself and how we know about the clinical indications for the remedy.
Which, when you think about it, is a little crazoid, because there's no other form of medicine that does it. Therefore, we are defined by it. And that's the point that I'm starting off from. So Hahnemann begins.
Wait, can I just say that's genius? That's totally genius. What you just said.
You're welcome. I have no idea what I said. What did I say?
No, just the fact that look, we talk about the practice of homeopathy all the time, and we talk about the medicines and the manufacturing process and all the argument about is there anything in it. But really, the core of the conversation has to include how we understand what the medicines do, which opens up this huge discussion. And I think the way that you just said it, this way that it sets us apart, is really key.
Yeah, absolutely.
Put a pat you on the back over here, sir.
No worries. You can give me a pat on the top of the head.
Yeah. I love that you're sitting there right in front of Hahnemann. It looks like his little hand is going to just.
Oh, this is the little hand.
Hahnemann. Yeah.
Little,
Very little hand. Yeah.
That's funny. From his little hands, when he's writing about the early days of provings, or the early days of homeopathy, he's clearly got in his own mind the way to go about such a thing. And you can imagine that for the founder of an organization, I don't really think he needs to be that explicit because he knows what he wants to do. He knows how to do it. But homeopathy gets out of control quickly. And I think that there's got to be a conversation about the way in Hahnemann needed to try and rein in discipline that quickly becomes international. And if you think about the way in which, say, the Germans play football, then it's the exact opposite to the way that the French play football or the Brazilians play football. And if you know that homeopathy spread around the world really quickly in the years from, say, I think it's 1819 when it's in Chile, and then it's in Brazil, and then it goes further around the world, Spain and the European countries. If you think about the way that it moved, then there are going to be different interpretations of it. A physician in Argentina in 1820 is going to go, oh, what's this that I'm reading about this new form of medicine? Oh, they do drug trials, and they're going to interpret that in different ways. In many ways, I think that the early days of homeopathy really should be discussed in terms of the way that Hahnemann is trying to control, rein in, get control of the narrative again. And then you've got the instructions on how to go about some of these things, right? So
I really like this. I really like where you're going with this.
you going to pat me on the head again?
Yeah.
All right. And then we get the instructions in the organon. And I'm sure that there would have been in letters to Berningshausen did some early provings, your mate Stapp, some of the other
In the archive.
Some of the other acolytes that he had around him. He then started to create a methodology on how provings were to be conducted. They were absolutely to be ingestive. There's no doubt about it. It's no dreaming this or sleeping on that or thinking about something else. If there's anything we know about Hahnemann, he was desperate to get away from the doctrine of signatures that had dominated clinical decision-making for hundreds of years in medicine.
So for people who are, I just want to roll back what you said, because you introduced a whole lot of concepts that I think could. So one of them is you're talking about ingesting the remedies in terms of how a proving is conducted. And we need to talk about that in a minute. And then you brought up the doctrine of signatures. And the doctrine of signatures is this, it's amazing to me how much people still rely on it in homeopathy. But Hahnemann was absolutely against it. And the doctrine of signatures is basically imagining what the clinical relevance of something would be based on its appearance, its smell, and not on the way that we get our information, which I think it's important for us to just read aphorism 20. Let me just, because Hahnemann says very clearly in aphorism 20, this hidden spirit-like power in the inner basin of medicines to alter the human condition and thus to cure diseases is in itself no way discernible with mere intellectual exertion.
Mere intellectual exertion. I love it.
You can't just think about what it's going to do and make a statement about it. He says, it is only by experience, only through its manifestations, while it is impinging on the human condition, that we can distinctly perceive it. This aphorism 20, that statement is absolutely key because it removes like anything that isn't there needs to be critically thought through before being accepted as fact, which includes clinical information. And we'll talk about that in a minute. But so this idea, Al, that you were mentioning before, like the ingesting, a healthy person has to take the substance. And because their baseline of health is understood, and people always ask the question about the baseline of health, like what actually makes a healthy person, right? That baseline of health is about their resilience. Can a person, we all have our stuff, but because a person's baseline of health and reactivity is understood before they participate in a proving, that when they take the remedy, the supervisor knows the difference between that which was their original state and that which is from the remedy impinging on the person. And because it's really important for us to do this safely, you want to make sure that the person is healthy enough. In other words, they have the resilience to bounce back up. Because when you are taking a remedy as a part of approving, you are taking it to induce symptoms. You're basically taking it to make yourself sick. And can I say one more part about that before you go back into what you were saying? And that is, I have a note written in my organon around aphorism 20, because I feel like it's one of the most important aphorisms in all of the organon. But the term I have written next to it is redemptive suffering, because there is a way in which there's no free lunch. If you are going to cure the sick, as it is termed, right? That's what Hahnemann says. You're going to cure the sick. You can't just go, oh, I'm just going to think about this remedy and what this animal does in the zoo and have a remedy made from it and then just give it to somebody and they're going to get better. The process, the entire process is an arduous one, and it begins with this redemptive suffering. So a homeopath, a healthy enough person, takes a substance knowing that they could get a big whack from it. They could get really sick. We both know what that looks like. And when that happens, all of those symptoms are documented. And then that information, through that transmutational process of the healthy person taking the remedy, they are transmuted into suffering. And the symptoms that they put out are then gathered and organized in such a way that they can be used for the inverse purpose, which is to make a person well. It's a two-way street, right? There's a dynamic action there. And so with that, this redemptive suffering is how we as humans, we are suffering in service to another person's well-being, that our suffering is going to potentially help others to get well. Yeah. I think it's just a beautiful part of the learning. I don't know. What do you think about that?
I mean, I hear you. I get what you're saying about the suffering is in service for other folks later, and it is, because that critical information that comes from the trial, when it's collated, means that when it's published, there are homeopaths all over the world that are able to access it and perhaps use that remedy that you've just been testing. But the way that I've always considered it is a little bit different. I was always influenced by that quote Herring made, that we suffer and we love it. And we come back for more.
Yeah. I don't know that I've loved it as much.
Yeah. And his story is that, whether this one's true or not, I hate passing on myths, but the myth being that he had some dysfunction on the left arm as a consequence of the laxus proving, or that his hand wouldn't work properly thereafter. And whether or not it was from the proving, or more likely that some of the actual snake venom was ingested in some way or affected him in some way. But that idea of, there's a quote that from Herring, the proving is the high feast in the Church of Homeopathy.
Oh, wow.
And I thought you'd like that one.
I do. I've never heard that, I don't think.
Yeah.
Where's that from?
Herring, 1R, no fish.
Yeah, 1R, no fish. I didn't mean where, as in which person's mouth did it come out of, but rather what, maybe in the intro to guiding symptoms. The other day I was reading Benninghausen's Lesser Writings. I was looking for something. Anyway,
just going back to the origins of all of this, because looking around, Hahnemann he's confident, and he's confident in his own ability to make this clinical decision-making part of medicine scientific. And you do it through experiment and experience, and you need healthy people. So he gathers around him a whole lot of healthy people. They all happen to be German male doctors.
in the beginning.
But you got to start somewhere. And there's some interesting examples of some completely not healthy German male doctors. And one of them, the name was Langhammer. And Langhammer is an interesting character because he seems to have been somewhat depressive. But nevertheless, his symptoms, or many of the symptoms that were elicited from his different drug trials, are still in our books and are still verified over and over again. It's amazing. But moving forward, the
But
proving,
what does that, sorry, but talk about that. Why is that an issue?
it's an issue because it's the difference between, from a modern point of view, it's the difference between a laboratory experiment and a real world experiment.
Mhm.
And the real world experiment would be a more subjective view of the healthy person. So if we've got a group of folks that want to participate in a drug trial, and you said it before yourself, the actual baseline is, are you healthy enough and resilient enough?
That's it.
As opposed to, are you completely symptom free?
Yeah, we're not going to find that person, I don't think. But I wanted you to talk more about Langhammer and why that's an issue. Because what I want us to get through today is to talk about how we have to think, like everything that's in a materia medica doesn't get there through the same process. And there are some glitches along the way.
You want some critical thinking, then we've got to then, and if you want this example, I'll give it to you. So a healthy person that develops a headache after taking a proving substance, that headache and its location, sensation, the modalities, all of the information around it is carefully written down by a supervisor and by the prover themselves, and that goes into the record. And a headache is a good example of something which is clearly attributable to the remedy, right?
Yep.
But also, we have situations where people get shitty, they get grumpy, or they get irritable, they start yelling at the neighbor, or they get cut off in traffic and they engage in a little bit of healthy road rage, or something like that. That it's a question: do we include that in the record? If someone is previously calm and then on the remedy or under the influence of the remedy they become irritable, then that is written down and included in the record. The thing with Langhammer was that his friends described him as morose and a pretty depressive kind of character by nature. And yet what we have in the provings that he was a part of, and there are 40 of them, including some favorites like Ledum, cyclamen, bryonia, Ledum, I think it might be Simicifuga. Oh, actually,
I don't know this one. You teach this. I don't have this.
yeah, I there's a list of remedies that he was a prover in, but in each of those provings, there is a reference to feeling depressive and morose and having a miserable time. And all of those symptoms come from him. Now, this is the genius of homeopathy because there's a paper trail, folks. So if you're doing a proving, and let's go back to Hahnemann's day, let's do a proving. There's 10 people doing the experiment. They all get the remedy and they all develop symptoms over the next 5 days, week, or 2 weeks, right? Then their health reestablishes, they come back into a sense of balance, and then off they go with their lives. But there's a paper trail that determines it's very easy to do this, to find out which individual prover got that symptom. So when you're looking at a repertory and the repertory says head pain, left side, pulsating, worse at night, you can, with not that much work, go to the proving, look for that symptom in the actual proving record itself, not in the repertory, but in the proving, and see which of the provers was associated with that. Then you go and look at the code and work out that it was Staff's butler or the horseman or whoever it was that was assisting whoever that staff in the proving. These days, each prover is given a number, and that number is the determiner of that paper trail.
Yep.
So the paper trail is critical to our work. And so
I want to follow up with this because in chronic diseases, right? So in the translator's preface to chronic diseases, and I use the TAFL translation, he says in his preface, this is not the Hempel translation, which was done by concepts, not by actual words. But anyway, but he says, when it was proposed to reprint this translation, there was a strong protest made against the old version on the ground of its being to some degree inexact, and on account of its omitting not only the initials of the provers, but besides this, also a great number of symptoms. These complaints have been proved well-founded, especially with respect to the latter part of the work. We've taken 100 symptoms at random here and compared them with the original with the following results. And then he goes on to say that the omissions, that there were omissions, that the paper trail that you're talking about wasn't clean. Therefore, chronic diseases has been republished, right? Because chronic diseases has a theoretical part and then it has the materia medica, so that the complete paper trail was evident.
Nice. I didn't know that. That's really interesting.
Stick with me, kid.
All right. So you get the idea that there is a logic and a method behind Hahnemann's original conception of conducting clinical trials on substances with healthy people to determine the profile of the remedy to be used clinically, right? Because that's what we do. We match patterns.
Yeah.
If there's a client with this pattern, we go into the books and look for the same pattern that's been established through drug trials. Now, the question that we were talking about is just what's healthy enough. And sometimes, and I completely trust the big guys' inclusion of, let me say, questionable symptoms from people that weren't quite healthy to start with.
Do you mean Langhammer and his...
Like Langhammer and his depression. Yeah.
Because one of the things that sort of, it's like an offshoot of this is, in homeopathy, one of the things that gets misunderstood is, what are you looking at? And we're not going to go all into that because we're talking about the provings and the remedies, but you're only looking at in your sort of homeopathic diagnostic role of case analysis, you're looking to see, where is the person since the time they were last well? What are the signs and symptoms that have changed since when they were last well? And that's going to be a shorter or a longer period of time, depending on if it's acute or chronic, right? But this is important because there is the mental and emotional aspect of it, which we could do an entire podcast on, which is about the shifts in the mental and emotional state of a person and how you match a remedy to that, right? And the thing is that Hahnemann talks about this in Aphorism 211. He says that the change in the mental and emotional state it holds good to such an extent that the patient's emotional state often tips the scales in the selection of the homeopathic remedy. And so this thing with Langhammer, that his sort of depression is associated with his natural state and is in the proving, that didn't happen because of the remedy. Therefore, the inverse is less likely to be true. And Hahnemann, he talks about this, the reason for this in the footnote to Aphorism 213. He says, thus, aconite will seldom or never produce either a rapid or permanent cure if the patient's emotional state is quiet and uniformly calm. Nux vomica will not cure if the patient has a mild and phlegmatic emotional state. Pulsatilla will not cure if the patient's emotional state is glad, cheerful, and stubborn. In other words, this shift in the mental and emotional state of the person when under the influence of the remedy is what is going to guide us to the opposite in the helping of the client. The reason we're laughing, if you're not watching this on video, is that I've been wrestling a cat. So she's come around, she's tried to come up through the back of my chair, and now she's on my desk in front of me. I had to move my teacup to give her room.
She's very sneaky.
Oh, she's sneaky and she's giant. Anyway, I love that you brought up the Langhammer thing, because I often forget about that. Because at the end of the day, what we're really coming to here is that there are so many ways in which critical thinking needs to be deployed in homeopathy. So in other words, when you're looking at a proving, you have to understand the methodology of the proving. How was it done? Is this person using a methodological framework that is consistent? Is the recording accurate? All of the things. But what people don't know is that sometimes in some provings, people aren't even taking the remedy.
These days. Let's not go there yet.
Okay.
I was teaching Causticum this week, and
Oh, my favorite.
And the students, because at the end of their first semester, they got a bit of a ding actually out of this one, because in the proving of Causticum, one of the telling parts of that proving is that the descriptions of the sensations are very often burning. So
Yeah.
You'll see burning pains, burning sensations in the skin. But when you get to the bladder section, it is burning urination, burning in the urethra, burning in the prepuce, burning, hot burning, itching, burning, more burning. It's like all of these different provers getting these symptoms. And there was one symptom, and the student put their hand up and said, "What's that at the end of the sentence?" And what it was a code, and the code is in T.F. Allen's Encyclopedia of Homeopathica. And the code is, which prover got this. The symptom was astonishing, like burning urination in the middle of the night, getting me out of bed, could not get back to sleep, emptied my bladder, and then the burning resumed for the next 4 hours, or something dramatic, or something like that. Then the person said, "What's that?" at the end. And the code means that was Hahnemann. That was Hahnemann who actually had that symptom. The number of symptoms talk about redemptive suffering.
Yes.
Oh, God.
And how old was he at the Causticum proving? I can tell you.
Because what is it? What is the date of the proving?
Here, look, I happen to have I have a bookmark in chronic diseases taking me right to Causticum, but it doesn't have the date of the.
Because causticum, it's this amazing substance, which is this sort of alchemical blend.
Yes, it is.
Carbon, potassium, and sulfur in an alembic with a whole lot of distillation.
Bladder. Yeah.
And exactly. And it's really hard to make. So having made it, he then takes it, trials it, and develops all of these symptoms. My God, that's incredible.
Well, and that's one of the original, what was known as the Hahnemann remedies. So these are remedies that came from Hahnemann's own ideas. He had an intention in mind. It's my favorite story to ask John Morgan. So if you want to read a great article, just Google John Morgan, The Mystery of Causticum. John Morgan, as most of you will know, or many of you should know, he's the founder of Helios Pharmacy in the UK. And he wrote this amazing article on the making of causticum. I think the article that was called The Mystery of Causticum. And he talks about being at the Isle of Raasay at the end of a dynamis, at like the big retreat at the end of a dynamis, and where he makes causticum. He burns marble on the beach.
Yeah.
And I just love that story. I asked him to tell me, like a kid with a bedtime story. "Hi, John, can you tell me the story of the making of causticum?" But what's so interesting about it is that he says in the article, it was like one of only 3 times that he has actually made it.
He's been successful 3 times out of 5 attempts over 11 years.
So what you have to think about that, right? I mean,
yeah.
So we've got this substance. So I'm excited. I get to do my alchemy lecture for the Australians this summer in July. I can't wait. It's one of my favorites. Anyway, but I think about this all the time. Like where is Hahnemann coming from? So there are all these things that we have to think about. Okay, what made him think to produce this highly caustic substance, right? And to make it involves an alembic and a pig's bladder and burnt marble. He didn't just get the potassium from the chemical supply shop. You got to burn the marble. How do you get a crucible to hold the amount of marble, to hold the temperature? And this is where the alchemy comes in. That's so interesting. One of the alchemists that I study, right? So if we're going to talk the Philalethes thing, his whole story is that he moved from America. He was a chemistry student, an alchemy student at Harvard, and he was from Bermuda originally and moved to the UK because of the furnaces that were available to him there for this alchemical work, right? He worked with Robert Boyle after that, one of the founders of chemistry. Anyway, Hahnemann here he is. It's okay. Once you start to think about it like this, you go, okay, this is the most amazing thing. So he comes up with this idea. Then you have to execute the idea and get it right. And then you have to take it and see how sick you get.
And then you've got people these days going, "Oh, I'm a homeopath. Oh, I'm doing provings." And they don't even take it.
They don't even take, I mean,
there are too many corners. There are so many corners where people cut these days in the eliciting of clinical symptoms and then writing them up and publishing them for the homeopathic community. And it's
we're not winning a lot of friends in this department because we're involved in this conversation that we can't get into it, but it has to do with how homeopathic medicines are manufactured and all this. And we keep saying, hey, if they don't have a proving, how do you know what it does? Because there are substances for sale that do not have provings. And then there are intellectual exercises to work around it. So, for example, people love the periodic table in homeopathy. I happen to love the periodic table and all of the ways that we can understand these medicines. Full stop. How we have the information, however, and how information has been documented over time, if you don't know to ask these questions, you might not know that Jan Scholten, for example, in 1993?
Yeah, 93, the first book.
His first book on the periodic table was published. What that book that people love and are still referencing today was, he had a really great idea. And the great idea was to do what Dmitri Mendeleev did. So Mendeleev is the guy who understood the predictive patterning of the periodic table before all of the elements had been isolated. So by his understanding of the atomic weight and the atomic number, he could predict what elements would fill in the gaps that had not yet been isolated. And it wasn't until the isolation of germanium and gallium, I think, that the table was rendered complete. I forget what year that was. Anyway, so what Mendeleev did was he had a predictive pattern in mind based on the knowledge that already existed. And Scholten did the same thing. So it lays out the periodic table, looks at the remedies for which we already have provings, and then extrapolated to what the remedies that did not yet have provings were going to do. But that is in violation of aphorism 20, because that's the mere intellectualization part of it. And then what happens is you get the provings later on and it doesn't match. So if I just mentioned germanium and gallium, so there's information from Scholten before the provings were done. Now, subsequently, there are these great provings of gallium and germanium, and it doesn't match what's in Scholten, or the noble gases, for example, or even salts, right? So mineral salts. So you've got your cation, your anion, right? So you've got these elements that need to be together in order to be stable, right? Forming a salt. And so back in the day, what were the remedies that Kent introduced? He just made assumption. It was an ammonium, wasn't it?
Well, I think it might have been. These substances which he lectured about, these were two minerals,
yeah,
which he intellectually put together and described the clinical indications. The problem was that you can't find them naturally in the world together, and there was no pharmacy that had manufactured them, and he was called on it. It was
you have to do a retraction.
H.C. Allen called him on it. Yeah, he was. I'm making this up. It would have been something like ammonium ferrum or something like that, and something which was unable to be chemically created, even in the laboratory at that time, certainly by a homeopathic pharmacy, not possible. And yet he was lecturing on what the clinical indications were, and he clearly made them up. What he did is he said ferrum is like this, or whatever the remedy was, antimonium is like this, put them together. This is the kind of clinical condition or person you're going to have that might need this remedy. He made it up, and then he got called on it and had to retract. Really embarrassing, humiliating. It's really interesting. He seems to have survived that. He did survive.
No, I know. We need to do a little bit more digging on that, because I find that fascinating, and I don't have the whole story. But the reason I bring it up is because one of the classes that I teach, which is on contemporary systems, it's critical thinking in contemporary systems, methodology, and materia medica in homeopathy. And the idea is that you've got these incredible thinkers who bring a new idea to the table, and you don't have to throw the baby out with the bathwater. I think some of what Scholten brought to the conversation is super interesting. And it certainly got us looking at and considering the periodic table, and some of the rows actually tell a story, but it doesn't follow all the way through. I teach row 4 just because I think that it's thematic. And then I think that row 6 is also thematic. But if you're just looking at the columns, for example, the halogens are sorry, I'm getting in the weeds, but for those who know the Scholten story, where you go from left to right and it's like the beginning, hitting the pinnacle, and then it's falling off, that doesn't work in every row. It certainly doesn't. The halogens they need to be seen in their own right. Fluorine and iodine, these are chlorine, all the muriates. It's like the muriates are not just about the mother. There's so much about chlorine and the respiratory issues, right? Bromine, all of the glandular stuff. So on one hand, you go, oh, he gave us this framework and got us to think. And then it only goes so far. Some of it follows through, some of it doesn't. So you take the good and you leave the rest. But what has happened in this, you were saying something before about cutting corners. I feel like there's this attempt to simplify in such a way that we're not asking the questions. I'm all for saying people have brought cool stuff in and it might not work all the way through. Therefore, take the part that works and leave the rest. And give them a thank you for having introduced something interesting. But
interesting you say that. Sorry, keep going. What were you going to say?
I was just going to say, but in this age of information being like the democratization of information that comes with digital searches. So we had a student, do you remember a couple of years ago, who submitted a case and the remedy was, I forget what the remedy was, but she used Scholten's materia medica when there was a proving and a good proving. And so she chose that information, which was speculative and not borne out in the actual proving that came later. So that's why critical thinking is
critical.
It's critical, right?
Yeah.
You were about to say something before when I said about taking the best and leaving the rest.
Yeah, I was. I wanted to say something out loud. I'm not quite sure that I should, but let's
always
just
think twice. Always think twice. Only say what is nice.
No, it's not casting any shade on anybody other than lazy people. No, if homeopathy is difficult, then what is it that draws people to the shortcuts to make it easier? I'm just trying to think of other examples in life where when something is difficult, where the shortcut never works. And I can't think of an example where a shortcut in homeopathy has really worked. We've got that example. Do you remember from a couple of weeks ago, the vet with the sheltered dogs giving a combination remedy? And we're all going, yeah, are you kidding? That's not a shortcut. That's super smart.
Yeah, do it. Absolutely. Yeah.
So
yeah, a time and a place like that. I love the expression, even a broken clock is right twice a day.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, that's interesting. I'll take that one. Anyway, with provings, we mentioned Scholten, and honestly, like I've been to a number of his lectures. I think I was actually probably at his first ever lecture in England in 1993 when that first book came out. But I remember what he said. He says, I don't trust provings. And that's his chemistry training. He's a solid chemist. That's his background. So similar to Hahnemann in a way.
Yeah.
But he said, I don't like them. I don't trust them. I wanted something more solid and came up.
I didn't know that.
Yeah. And again, I don't want to cast any shade or anything like that but that's my memory of the many seminars that I've sat through with him and the conversations I've had with him. And he might describe it differently these days, but he definitely said that back in the day, which was the driver of using the map of nature. And the map of nature is the periodic table. It just is.
Yeah.
It's amazing.
And this is the thing. This is the part that I just love, that there are these great thinkers who are wanting to crack the code, get into the mystery of it. The thing is that Hahnemann did. We don't need to add to it. We need to keep looking at, like, he got us this far. I don't think we need to turn left. I think we need to
Yeah, but there are buts on that side as well, because he did, and he did give us this method, and a solid method of observation and empiricism. But some of the modern provings, you've got to look at them, or some of the provings even in soon after his death,
if you're talking about provings, yeah.
Some of those provings are shocking, unbelievably bad, like poor, terrible methodology, starting with not identifying the substance correctly or at all.
Yeah.
Then very strange dosage protocols throughout the proving. These days we know it so easily and so well that if you develop a symptom, you stop, just like clinical practice, isn't it? I remember doing a review of a nosode proving I think it might have been for the European Journal of Integrative Medicine or something like that, back in the day. And this author was doing a very bizarre dosage administration in approving with no precedent at all. I researched that. There was no precedent anywhere in clinical application or in clinical research to do what he was doing with the dosage of that.
Did they make a claim that that there was precedent for it?
Oh, no, it was just a description of the methodology that was used. I mean, in the end, it was interesting because I raised some questions and wrote back to the author and said, change this, do this. Why did you do that? If there's no reference. When you're a peer reviewer, you've got the opportunity to write back to the author, but also write to the editor.
Yeah.
And the editor, and I wrote back to the editor and said, look, there's a problem with this one. And actually, the editor pulled it, just did a desk, known as a desk rejection.
Yeah.
Based on that. But that was a serious researcher trying to get information out about a nosode from doing a proving of a nosode.
This is important though, because if you look at the person who has introduced the most nosodes into the old materia medica would be Swan and Berridge together for a lot of them, but Samuel Swan, most of them. But then if you go and you read Swan's original writings, he talks about his nosodes. He says, nature gave us the proving. So he's basically relying on clinical symptoms. He says, we already know because healthy people got this disease and therefore, but the thing that's missing there is that you're not getting the aphorism 153 out of it. What is the strange, rare, and peculiar, or the most characteristic symptom of all? It's an assumption there just about that disease itself, which is, it's bordering on isopathic. And so
as if it's a dirty word.
Read the footnote to 56. But I think that for example, in one of the examples that I wrote about, I think I wrote about this in my dissertation, or maybe it's just I wrote about it somewhere else.
Maybe that was someone else.
I was having a split personality day. No, but about pyrogenium and sepsin. I can't remember if it made it to the final edit, but I know when I teach the lecture, it's there. And so back in sort of the evolution of homeopathy, people are thinking about how we understand remedies in different ways. And so if you were a surgeon in the 19th century, in the very early days of anesthesia, that meant that you could leave a body cavity open for a longer period of time, because the person was not flailing and screaming and having to be strapped down, they're out. So you could get in there, look around, do whatever, but the longer the body cavity was left open, the greater the likelihood of getting an infection, right? Which would be sepsis. And there was a recognition in the way that it's written about in the old literature is there would be laudable pus and there would be a smell, and that smell would be like rotting. It was a rotting smell. So you've got, what's the British guy who did pyrogenium? I can't think of his name. It'll come to me. But anyway, he said, oh, what I'll do, I'm thinking about this from a corollary standpoint. What's going to smell?
He's thinking about it as a homeopath.
Exactly, as a homeopath. So he takes rotten meat, puts it in a bag, puts meat in a bag, leaves it out in the sun in July heat to rot, and then gets that rotten meat juice and potentizes it. And then people take that and get obviously a lot of symptoms. And so you've got this great example of homeopathy or homeopathic thinking, a similar, right? A corollary idea. On this side of the pond, somebody says, oh, let's get septic pus and potentize it. In fact, Swan wrote to Herring and said, do you have any sorry?
Yeah, no, I was just agreeing. Yeah, he did. What did he do?
Swan writes to Herring and says, do you have any blood from a septic injury? I have a guy over here who wants to do a proving of it because he's just finished his surgical residency and wants to have a remedy for it. And Herring writes back to Swan. He says something like, I don't have septic blood. And then he goes on to say, because arsenicum cures all septic wounds, which made me so mad. No, it didn't. It cured your septic wound, but all cases are going to be individualized. Anyway, but Herring says, oh, why don't we get it to the chemist, Wormley in Chicago, right? He says something about getting the sulfocyanide out of it. And so on one hand, you have homeopathic thinking, right? The guy who does the rotten meat juice, who says, what is this substance about? And on the other hand, you have a much more isopathic orientation. Let me get the septic blood. So you've got similar and same.
Yeah.
And Herring took it even one step further to break it down into its smallest components. And it's a conversation for another day, but it's like a really big conversation to have. Because Herring had some incredible thoughts. Herring and Lippe, before they got in their big fight, when they were pre-frenemy stage, there was a proving of, and I always forget which, it was one of the crustaceans. Was it Limulus or no? Homerus. I think it was Homerus, the lobster. Anyway, he says,
the copper thing.
Exactly. Herring says, oh, I wonder, we should do a proving of this because this creature, I think it's Homerus, the blood is blue, which means that it has a lot of copper in it, something like that. And he says, because cuprum was a remedy for, what do you call it? Cholera, right? Then you could extrapolate and say, maybe this creature that has this copper in its blood would also be a great remedy for these kinds of GI problems. And it's pretty genius. And those provings, although very incomplete, unfortunately, I want somebody to do Homerus, Limulus, and what's the crayfish? What's it called? Astavius something.
Aster.
No, you're thinking of Asterius Rubin. No, I think it's Astavius. I could look it up.
Aztec? ASTAC?
Let me look.
Anyway, I want to throw in there horseshoe crab. Let's do a proving of that.
There is.
Horseshoe crab.
Yeah, that's one of the ones. That's Limulus, is the horseshoe crab. Homerus is the lobster, and the crayfish is, I have to look it up before we get off because it'll drive me crazy. Hang on.
All right. This is where I take over with chatting about something distracting while Denise looks up in her software.
No, I'm not looking at my software. I'm looking in my lecture notes because I teach the sea creatures, which I love. Here we go. All right. We've got Limulus, the horseshoe crab, proving by Herring. We've got Homerus gammarus, the lobster. That's the digestive fluid of the live European common lobster. And Astacus, that's it. Astacus fluviatilis. Astacus fluviatilis. That's the crawfish.
The craw.
Yeah. But let's just finish with this because I think with provings, it's so interesting, like how exciting it is when we have all the knowledge. And I've been saying for a while, because I get to teach this twice a year, and every time you teach it in complete proving, it's, oh my gosh, somebody needs to do the complete proving because I'm obsessed with these creatures. So the clinical affinities here I'm talking about Homerus lobster, IBS, ulcerative colitis, Crohn's, urticaria, allergies, milk intolerance, anaphylactic shock, inflammations, blepharitis, all kinds of allergy symptoms. Now, I'm pulling together lots of information at the moment, but who wrote about this? Chaudhary and Clark. Clark says being worse from milk should be a strong indication for its use. So lots of urticaria here from Clark. Itching followed immediately on its subsidence with swelling of lips, nose, eyes, and throat. So in a time when we are dealing with all of these allergy symptoms, right? It's so important for us to be thinking about what other uses do they have. So the thing I said about Herring before with the blood, I told a lie. It was Limulus. It was horseshoe crab, not lobster. Yeah, Lippe and Herring. Herring was surprised. This is coming from Vermeulen wrote about this. Herring was surprised to see the blue blood of the king crab that he dissected, which on investigation was found to contain copper, as he had surmised, and which he thought would prove another medicine for cholera. Further provings are necessary to establish this, though symptoms so far observed make this probable. So this is, again, it's a partial proving here, Limulus, but clinical affinities with Limulus: extreme diarrhea and vomiting, gastric fluke, cholera, breathing difficulty, stroke, skin complaints, urticaria, herpes, allergies with skin and lung symptoms.
Oh, let's do provings. They sound fantastic to have. Redemptive suffering.
Oh
my Lord.
Yeah, but if you think about some of the things we see, we had this great conversation in clinic this week because we've had So we've been seeing a ton of PANS and PANDAS cases in our clinic. And for a while, we didn't have them come through clinic because we need to have case managers that are at the level of complex case clearance. And we now have a new crop of people that we're mentoring. It's so exciting, which means that we can get case managers through our practitioner development, like the folks that, what do we call it? Not practitioner development. Yeah, the practitioner development track, whatever we call it, like for our graduates. Anyway, and so we can now see these cases in our clinic, which are so key, right? So we've had, I think in the last month, I've done at least 3 in clinic of some sort of pediatric encephalitis diagnosis, right? So yeah, we've had a couple of PANDAS cases, and then we had another, which was a different type of pediatric encephalitis. I won't go into the details, but what's been really interesting and bearing out in my research is that these cases, there's always some sort of allergic component. And we've been like delving into the difference between the IgG and the IgE mediated allergies and how these are playing into the different types of expressions of symptoms, like in PANS and PANDAS and these other encephalitis things. It's super exciting. And so anyway, when you start to see these substances that have this capacity for helping with different allergic syndromes, right? It's really key. Having to deal with moving things off my desk so that the cat can have her spot.
Pretty hilarious, because watching you there, you're getting all Italian. You're waving both. If you put your cup down again and start waving both your arms around, that really stops the cat from getting to where she wants to go.
I know. I had to pick up my cup because I don't want her to put her head in my tea.
No.
Look, this is what she does. Ouch, to be able to sit on my lap.
Yeah.
We don't have time for all of them. Let me just say, somebody wrote in one thing. Sandra writes in about the Schumann resonances. And I think that she might have heard the opposite of what was intended. When a couple of episodes ago, 116, when I talked about the pink light thing and how we all vibrate at a particular energy pattern, I can't believe that I actually said that publicly, but so be it. But the idea was to give an image to how this idea of the stronger similar works. And what Sandra was saying, that why would people all need a different remedy if we were vibrating with the Schumann resonances? And you're correct. What we're talking about is that, or at least in my example, which I just made up. So this is just a way for me to visualize it. But we in health vibrates with that, the Schumann resonance. That's the heartbeat of the universe. But we have these patterns within us that resonate against it or in their own frequency. And that's what the stronger similar of the homeopathic remedy is neutralizing and returning to help and giving that energy back to the organization. So I hope that helps with Sandra's question. And then Louise wrote in a very long thing about studying homeopathy and being taught to use experience and not believe anything that they were taught, but to check it out for yourself. In other words, to confront group-held beliefs and authority structures. So libertarian homeopathy.
Yeah, I read that and I thought to myself, yeah, that's fine. That's the basis of critical thinking is, don't believe everything. And, but therefore you're limited to your experience. And so if Denise's experience is with working with extremely complex cases, the pediatric cases that she was just talking about, but you're dealing with the worried well, or someone else is dealing with kids that are upset or whatever. Our practices are all different, and therefore your experience is going to be limited. And therefore your opinions.
And she says, personally, I've often wondered whether instead of dividing the homeopaths by classical and non-classical, what would happen if results were audited each time? So that determined the situation. And we totally agree with that. We are 100% on board. And we have reached out to people who are using other methodologies, because what we've devised in our practitioner generated research network, which you can find out more about if you go to advancedhomeopathy.org, is that we're looking at results. So we're looking at what comes in and how they leave. So anybody who wants to participate, we have an IRB. Everybody takes ethics course so that everybody understands the ethics of human subjects research. And we make sure that everybody is research ready. And then we devise a way we've devised a way to look at outcomes in these cases. So yeah, totally fair. But other things, she's saying that people aren't using things like the Tom Jansen and people who are doing detox and so forth. The thing is, it's not homeopathy. If they want to test their detox protocols, that's fine. Unfortunately, we don't have the analytical framework, or we don't have, no, sorry, I take that back, the philosophical framework. So what we're working with is a literal philosophical framework as put forth by Hahnemann in the Organ on and in Chronic Diseases. It tells us what to do. And we're finding, and we're able to measure our results, that it works. Now, if people are using other methodologies that are not based on Hahnemannian principles or are based on what is basically isopathy, any of these detox things are isopathic, that's fine. But there isn't a philosophical framework for that. And I think that sits it outside of our IRB. But if people want to do studies on that, we encourage it, because anything that's going to be helpful, I think that we should do. Yeah. And then there were some other things, like so many methodologies. She says a lot are classical, like Benninghausen, polarity analysis, sensation map, etc. And I would agree. And they are classical adjacent at worst. But the thing with like Benninghausen, like the TBR2, is it's limited to a certain number of medicines. And when you get into complex autoimmunity, building a complete symptom doesn't always work with the I don't know how to say this in a very succinct way, but there are some challenges. But you can take that idea and build it out. And that's basically how we practice. So in total agreement with you there. Polarity analysis developed by, I think, one of the nicest people on the planet. And that is, you can shrink down what you do into that framework, or you could just use it the way homeopaths do. I taught a clinic last night where we used a polarity in the analysis of a case as one aspect of it. I think most well-trained homeopaths are using that framework, just not as a smaller philosophy. And with sensation, I think that in the classical paradigm, we would just call it, it's not necessarily built on Sankaran's original sensation methodology, which he introduced in the 90s, but rather simple language. And some cases really lend themselves to that. So I don't think we're as far apart as many people think, right? And so if that's the case, great. And then the last thing she says, she went on a ferry trip and was seasick. And on the return trip, purchased a combination seasickness remedy, which she took, and it was effective. I totally agree with that, right? For something acute, you know what you get. There's no reason not to use a combo for something like that. I think that everybody gets worked up, like they're coming to take my cheese. And that's not what we're really talking about. When we talk about combination remedies, we're not talking about that. We're talking about some of these remedies that we've counted how many doses people are taking in a day, or that each dose includes hundreds of hits of a homeopathic medicine, to the point where we're seeing children who have taken thousands, hundreds, if not thousands of doses in a short period of time, who are coming to us with pediatric dementia, is what it's been prescribed as. So those are two different things. So I really appreciate Louise and her comments about bringing us together and not apart. I totally agree. And along with that, if people are doing something different, let's just call it something different. Why call it homeopathy if it's not? How about saying using medicines that were prepared for homeopathy that have an effect when used according to some other framework? And that removes it and creates clarity for people who are trying to learn what homeopathy is. I don't know. That works for me. Does that work for you, Will?
Sure works for me.
Yeah. So, Louise, I think that the one thing I would say is I feel a lot of emotion in your comment about fear-mongering and disapproval from the classical homeopaths toward the non-classical. And I'm going to say, I don't know about that. We're certainly not fear-mongering. What we're saying is that we have evidence of harm of people who have been treated in what you're referring to as non-classical ways. We're going to say in the use of medicines that's not aligned with homeopathy. And the reason for us in being clear about that is, number one, I don't want on my conscience anybody who's getting hurt, especially kids. And number two, if somebody gets hurt seriously or someone dies, happened in Australia, I don't want them coming back and saying all homeopathy is bad, because we have 230 years of clinical evidence that when we operate according to principles, we get good results. And we want to stick with that. We're not telling anybody else what not to do, but just let's be clear about what homeopathy is. It's based on universal law. And you do you. And I'm glad you didn't have seasickness. And we want to work with everybody toward best outcomes. And if you're using homeopathic remedies in a way that's not homeopathy, just call it something else. We're fine with that. How's that sound? Al, what do you think?
Yeah,
Good.
I think that is a really good and clear description.
Yeah, I think so. Nobody needs division. Let's work together. There's so many sick people that need our help. And for folks who are doing it differently, get your IRB going, get your research going. And if it's something that we can support you with in our research office, we're really happy to. All right, gang, we got to go. It's been lovely spending this time with you, and we'll do it again.
Ciao.
See you, everybody.
AHE is changing the face of homeopathy education by raising the bar through rigorous academics and unparalleled clinical training delivered live through the soulful use of cutting-edge technology. AHE prepares its students to become fully rounded homeopathic practitioners from anywhere in the world. Apply today at ahe.online.